we've become very used to knowing ourselves and knowing life um, based on how it all appears. And how it appears is a result of how we have developed, how everything has been put in place. And how everything has been put in place, how it's developed, and how life is experienced on the surface tends to ignore and overlook, tends to cover up certain nuances about, in particular, what the human being is and what certain parts of the human being are and where they fit in relative to life overall. So essentially what I'm saying is that we tend to wake up in the morning in a confused state, unaware of what's what in terms of where our thinking or who we are, or who the sense of who we are is and where it comes from. And so if we wake up in the morning that way and live life that way, essentially we're living life in a confused way. And so if teachings tend to describe things differently, and by describing things differently, they're directing attention onto components of the daily life experience that are always there, but that aren't looked at in a particular way. So I guess it's a bit like, saying if there's a person in a white hat in a crowd, they're just a person in a white hat. Why not? Person with a white hat on, just a person. If, however, a security alert comes out and says it's understood that there is a troublemaker in the crowd and he's wearing a white hat, and that information gets disseminated onto you, you now will see the person with the white hat in a different light. Because attention and information has been delivered or information has been delivered that by default directs your attention towards a white hat, whereas previously there was no reason for your attention to go towards the white hat. And teachings are essentially doing that. They're saying, hey, there's these components of life and life experience and the human being that until now no one has really spoken about. And so because no one's spoken about them, they don't seem particularly important. Just like the person in the white hat, until the security alert is delivered, there's no reason to think that the white hat is anything significant. And so teachings are essentially pointing out aspects of life that require our attention. And as attention lands on these dynamics, they start to be seen differently to before. And one of the very significant parts of the human being or of the life experience is our thinking. The thinking arises. It's the commentary about life that we've always known. It's the only commentary that there has ever been about life. And the commentary is a commentary about life from the perspective of the person. Like, oh, that was a wonderful day. It's such a shame that the weather isn't good. I'm looking forward to starting a new career. Or when I grow old, I'd like to be a fireman. These narratives, this thinking is something that's been with us all our life. So much so that we are convinced that that's my thinking, that's who I am, and that is the person thinking. That is that when we say, I really appreciate that painting, it's so wonderful to be in the sunshine, the thought is referring, the thought is self-referential. And what is it self-referencing? I am so happy to be in the sun. So it is assumed that the thought is one with and belongs to, well, obviously it's the body that's in the sun. So then if the thought arises and the thought says, I am so happy to be in the sun, the relationship to that thinking is that is me thinking, my thinking, I am that. And what we might notice about thinking is that it can morph into many, many different shapes. You can think anything about anything. And what we might also notice if we start looking at thinking is that it has a very powerful effect on the experience in the moment. That thoughts are not benign or inert. They aren't objects that are insulated and fairly superficial. So what I mean by that is if you were in a room and someone just put some keys on the table in the room, you could say that the keys don't really affect the atmosphere in the room. They don't affect the people in the room. They're sort of quite an inert object. If, however, you get a capsule, a stink bomb, and you throw the stink bomb on the floor in the room, it has quite a powerful effect on the whole experience. It pervades the whole experience, and everyone in the room smells the smell of the stink bomb. And so we can say it's not, that particular object is not inert. It fills in all of the spaces. If someone comes in with a really loud stereo system playing really loud noise or sets off firecrackers in the room, we can say that object, those objects are not inert. They affect everything in the room. And thoughts are not inert objects. Thoughts have a very powerful capacity to influence the experience. And furthermore, they influence the experience in a way that feels very personal, because the thought is a thought about me. Now, what me is the thought about? It would seem on first assessment that the me thought is about the body, or the entity inhabiting the space. But actually, if you took away the body from the experience, if in a meditation the sense of the body fell away, yet the thought about the past arises, like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I've ruined my whole life by acting that way. That thought has a very powerful effect on the experience, and its effect is not an inert. It's not an impersonal effect. It's a very personal effect, because within the thought there is the me that shouldn't have done this or that, and so the me is contained within the thought. So the whole psychological identity is contained within the thought, and this is not seen, this is not understood. This is a nuance that gets lost based on how that object presents itself on a surface interpretation of life. So when we walk in the room and we see something, and the thought arises that says, that shouldn't be that way, because of the correlations between things, the body walking in, the seeing, and the thought, it all seems like the thought belongs to the body. The thought is about the body or the entity, and that they are all one unit, and that the thought is referring, when it says I, is referring to the body. However, we could find ourselves walking into a room, same situation, and a different thought arises. And the different thought could be, it would still talk about an I or a me, but one version of the story that arises could be, this is not acceptable. This is an attack on who I am, or I am not good enough. And there's an uncomfortableness in. And another version of the thought could be, well, this is life. Or, it doesn't even need to be in the thought, this is life. It could be just a response that says, oh, I need to do something about this. So just a clear observation of the situation and a knowing that let's deal with it practically. Now, the two different thoughts will create very different experiences. And the thoughts can be very different depending on what produces the thought. So the thought is not really about the person or the body. The thought is a thing in and of itself. It creates an identity, an entity, a sense of self. And that sense of self is very dependent on the content of the thought. So this needs to be seen, because ordinarily it's assumed that the thought is the only way that can be, because it's assumed that the thought is about the objective person. And so if the thought is who I am, then it can only be that way. Whereas if we see that the thought is essentially a happening in and of itself, and that it's not necessarily as directly correlated to who we are as we might feel it is. Then there can be a witnessing of thought as an object that arises in the experience. If it's assumed that the thought is part of me, and the thought includes the me in it, so that's why it's felt so much as if the thought is who I am, then there is no distance between the sense of self and the thought. The sense of self is contained in the thought, and that type of thought that contains a sense of self and a system that has no distance from that thought results in what we call identification with thought. And that is essentially the doer, or what traditionally might be referred to as the ego, and that shift, that awareness, that realization needs to happen if there's going to be any significant changes in our sense of self, as far as this teaching goes. So there may be many other teachings before the realization I'm talking about, but if there's going to be any significant progress made, any significant changes in relation to what is spoken about in these teachings, then it's quite important that thinking and the sense of self and all of the personality, the working mind and the thinking mind, are seen to be movements of thought. When a non-dual teaching says there is no person, there is no one, there is no individual, there is nobody home, then what they're really talking about is the realization that happens when the narrative, the thinking that includes in it the sense of me and I, is seen to, which feels like the entity that has lived its whole life. And so unless attention is brought to thought and thinking, we will continue to wake up the thought, I am so-and-so in this world, and today I need to do this and that, and yesterday I did this, and in the future I'll do that. And it's not even about the past and the future so much. It's just about recognizing how without thought there is no one. That the sense of someone is contained in thought. There is a more basic sense of self that can sometimes be described as prior to thinking. That's the sense of being. And that is quite an impersonal sense of being, because it's not content related. It isn't about a me that is doing something or has done something, or a me that someone else is doing something to or doing something for. And it isn't about a me that is self-referential as a body within space or time. It's a much more primal sense of isness. It's a sense of isness that can be known in a meditation, when eyes are closed and when there is no sense of a world, there are no visual or sound objects that are defining time and space. There are no thoughts about what your history is, no residual self-image that says, I am a person currently sitting in a room feeling bored, or having sat in meditation for 15 minutes. All of that falls away in meditation, can fall away. And so essentially there is no sense of being an individual or being in a world. And yet what is undeniably here in that space, the aware space, is awareness and the sense of existence. And that sense of existence doesn't require a I am this or that thought to be there in order to bring the sense of existence into being. So it is a sense of existence or sense of self that is prior to thinking. And so that is the sense of self that is often referred to as our true nature, our true essence, the self with a capital S. And it's not personal. It has no preferences. It has no age or sex or personality. It simply is. It is just an impersonal sense of I am, existence. And what I mean by I am, we're so used to knowing the I as being the body, the personality, the one who is a victim or a winner or a struggler or a friend or a father or a mother, or we're so used to I being something very defined. When I talk about impersonal sense of I am, what is really being spoken about is a sense of existence that predates any of that imagery, predates any thinking, any thought that brings any of that imagery into existence. And if I were to ask the question, if you were sitting in meditation, resting in this being, which is easily overlooked even though it's ever present, until our awareness lands on it, it's always there, but it's easily overlooked. And so someone might say, what's this impersonal sense of I am you're talking about? And it's overlooked because it's the very essence of what's left when the world, the daily living experience falls away. It's like if the question comes into the meditation space, are you dead? At first we might think, oh, that's an odd question. Like, how do I answer that question? And we might go to our head to answer the question, are you dead? And in thinking about it, we might realize, oh, I'm thinking, therefore I am, therefore I'm not dead. That's one way of answering the question, are you dead, where the answer is self-evident because there is thinking. We go, well, if I'm thinking about the question, I can't be dead. Unfortunately, that doesn't help point to the impersonal sense of I am at all. It, in fact, does the opposite. It answers the question without pointing to the impersonal sense of I am. So how is it that question, are you dead, can help us recognize the impersonal sense of I am in a meditation? And that is by not going to thinking to answer the question, but rather going to experience or direct knowing prior to thinking, which is to feel into the experience, the meditation experience, And what is undeniable, this is the one undeniable truth in daily life, is that the impersonal sense of I am. So if it's overlooked, we might say, well, I don't know if I'm dead. Could be our answer. But the thing is that it's self-evident that we're not dead because there is the sense of existence. And when awareness lands on the sense of existence, there may be an intuitive sense that says this sense of existence can be called I amness. Now, why a lot of people will say, oh no, I am, that's not I am, because the reason that if someone bumps into this impersonal sense of existence, and I suggest that is what I amness is referring to, someone would say, that's not I amness. And the reason that they might say that's not I amness is because the word I is being held by the intellect that hears the suggestion that that innate sense of existence, the impersonal sense of existence that we can know directly as what we are in meditation, the intellect that's hearing that as being called I am says, no, that's not I am, because as far as that intellect knows, I, the word I, is used exclusively for the sense of I am this or that, I am good or bad, I have done this and that, I am a father, I am a brother, etc., etc. And so it says, no, that's not I, that sense of impersonal existence, that you can't call that I, that is the absence of I. But if we redefine the word I and say, what if I can denote impersonal existence, which is impersonal I? This is where our definitions of words, when they're not seen to be definitions, become so restrictive, because without knowing it, we have a definition of a word, and as soon as someone uses the word, it conjures up the image of what the definition of that word is. And you could have a different definition of the word I. So for me, when I talk about I, I'm not talking about a conceptually defined sense of person or me. There is that. There is a conceptually defined I know that. But then there's also the impersonal I, prior to any thinking, that I also know directly, and I can use the same word I for that, and then the same word I for the personal I. And as long as we know that, okay, the word I has two definitions in my system, then I'm not concerned if, obviously, if there's two definitions, the one word I is used for two different things, but we have two different definitions. If we hold on to the word I, and only have one definition for it, and that definition is the personal me, and then someone describes the impersonal and calls it I, and someone says, that's not I. So much so, Ramana used in Tamil double I, to denote the sense of self with a capital S, the impersonal self, which is sometimes referred to as the essence, consciousness, God consciousness even. I. So if we can't possibly call the impersonal I, why is it Ramana decided to use two I's instead of one I, which he would refer to as the personal self, the self with the small s? And in the Bible, one of the Bible stories, when Moses went up and came across up into the mountain and came across the burning bush. I think it was Moses. And the burning bush was a representation of God speaking to Moses. And Moses was sort of surprised and frightened and puzzled. And so the bush was talking to him. It was a burning, talking bush. No wonder someone's a bit surprised and puzzled. And so, who are you, was the question. And the response from the burning bush, which is a depiction of God, I am that I am. And that answer, who are you? I am that I am. It's a very important answer because it doesn't define, the answer isn't definitive. The answer isn't restrictive. The answer isn't reductionist. So if I say, oh, I am a gardener, or I am a father, like if, oh, who are you? I am a father. So now, oh, what about the fact that you are a son? Oh, yes. So if you say you're a father, you essentially have eliminated in your answer that you are a son, or a husband, or a wife. Forget about genders, And so whenever we answer a question, we have to know, oh, it's a concept. I am a father is a concept. And what that means is it's not the truth. So I'm deviating a little bit to go back to this, something I say that whatever is put forward here as a description is a concept and not the truth, which means we can say, if we're asked, who are you? We could say, well, I'm a father. It's a concept, it's not the truth, because I'm also a brother and a son. So, but as a concept, I'm a father is accurate. If someone says, no, you're wrong because you're also a son, that means they're relating to your concept as if you're putting it forward as the truth. So if you're putting it, if you were putting that concept, I'm a father, forward as if it's the truth, then someone reacting to that would be correct, because by saying it's the truth, you're saying it's absolute. If it's absolute, then there's no space for you also being simultaneously a son and a brother. If it's a concept, you say it's correct, I am a father, but I'm not saying that's the absolute truth. It is a description of what I am from a certain angle. From another angle, I'm a brother. From another angle, I'm a son. And so if I answered with the concept, I am a son, that is also correct from a relative point of view. And so all of the concepts need to be held as concepts and not the truth. So why then, we go back to the burning bush. I am that I am. So it's like answering the question, well, I could tell you I'm a father, but then if I don't tell you I'm a brother, I'm not doing myself justice. If I tell you I'm a father and a brother, but I forget to tell you I'm a son, then I'm not describing it fully. So then if I tell you I'm a father, a brother, and a son, then have I done the job? No, because I'm male, I'm hungry, I'm, all sorts of things. So, okay, we'll throw that in. And the point is we could never describe the totality of what we are in any moment. And then as soon as, if we did manage to describe the totality of who we were, which is an impossibility in one moment, the next moment it's changed. And so the answer, I am that I am, is an answer that is akin to us stepping out of our restricted narrative about who we are. It's about realizing that outside of our thinking, there is a field that is not inhibited by the description of the thoughts. So God consciousness essentially is the opposite, or the freedom from self-consciousness. The self with a small s, where the self with the small s is particularly dangerous and restrictive when there isn't a healthy attitude towards the arising of a description in a way that we know it's a concept, it's relative. So when the sense of self arises and the relationship with the sense of self is, this is who I am, this is how it is, absolutely, there's a big error in that. Because whatever story is being told about who we are and how life is, whether it's good or bad, it's really seeing it from a very narrow perspective. And from another perspective, the fire in the forest is a great thing. It's a rejuvenation of life. From the perspective of the animal whose family has been killed, whose house has been wiped out, it's really bad in that moment. It may also be a rejuvenation of life for that remaining animal that didn't die in the fire, and it meets another animal who's lost its family, and they get married and live happily ever after. So to the extent that there is this sense of self, this thought that defines things absolutely, and there's no perspective that realizes this can only be a facet of who I am, then that sense of self is very, very restrictive. It covers up a whole dimension of the human being that can coexist with our personality. So I'm talking about seeing the sense of self as limited, not what we are. So that's bringing attention onto the thinking. And at first, hopefully, it will allow us to rest in a place of no thought. To be that which is aware of the thinking, if there is the thinking, and see it as a movement of thought that contains in it a me or an I that has been there for our whole life, and that there has been an identification with for our whole life, meaning essentially a bonding of how I know myself into that thought structure. So that is awakening. To awaken to the fact that what I've always known myself as is just a thought. That my whole sense of self as, going somewhere, successful, needing to work harder, not working hard enough, being the best, being really terrible, being funny, being an extrovert or an introvert, all of that's a series of thinking. And because in that thinking it's got this I, and it's got all of the memory of our past, that is what life has put in place as our sense of self. And when a deeper aspect of life becomes aware of thinking as an object and sees how lost in thought, how identified with thought, awareness or life has been, that is an awakening moment. So as I was saying, when a teaching says there really is no individual, what it's pointing at is when there is a realization that the sense of self that we have known ourselves as, and known ourselves as the person that is separate, when it's seen that that is simply a thought, a continuous linear thought that creates a sense of self, and where it's deeply seen to be just thought with a great power, a great experiential influence on the experience of life, there is this awakening, this surprise. Oh my God, there is no, I am not what I thought I was. There is no one here. There is no person. Now, remember, I'm taking this from a certain angle. In the teaching from a different angle, I will say there is a person. But in that case, I'm using the word person differently to here. So when there's this realization, what it's saying is, I am not the person that I've always known myself as, which is really known myself as this narrative, this thinking. So why this is so important is because we can put forward all of the concepts of non-doership and any concepts about spiritual, and if they don't break down and reveal that there is no one here, that the thinking is an impersonal movement or a happening, then what will take place is that thinking will evolve in such a way that it seems like there is thinking about the concept. And it will seem like there is someone thinking about the concepts. And if that's the case, what happens is that the concepts reinforce the sense that I am this entity that at some point can be seen to be just thought. And so it needs to be pointed out that all thinking, both the thinking mind and the working mind, include in them a sense of self. And it needs to be seen that the working mind and the thinking mind bring into existence a sense of self. Now, once that's seen, then what we'll know ourselves as is the quiet space that reveals itself when identification with thought is withdrawn. Now, it's not withdrawn by someone, so you don't have to do withdrawing. It's in the moment where awareness becomes aware of all of the thinking, that has always presented as who I am, which is a narrative about anything. Even the thought, I'd like to watch television. This political party is very bad for the country. I wonder what my sister is doing. What shall we do for the holidays? Any thinking brings in a sense of self which we've always known ourselves as. When that's seen that there is just thought about a person, that includes within it a person, then there is a silent awareness of thinking which we've always known ourselves to be, but now there is a disidentification with thought. So that which is aware of the thinking is what we know ourselves as. So if we go to the descriptions of non-doership, we say, thoughts arise in a body-mind organism, meaning thoughts are an output of the cookie machine. The body-mind organism is a result of the genes and up-to-date conditioning, and thoughts arise in a body-mind organism based on its genes and up-to-date conditioning. Feelings arise in a body-mind organism. Emotions arise in a body-mind organism. There is no one that is producing the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions. There is a biological instrument that produces the thoughts, the emotions, the feelings, and a witnessing of thoughts arising, a witnessing of emotions arising from a biological instrument by default is a witnessing of that which we are prior to thinking, prior to identification with thinking. So the description that says the thoughts arise out of the mechanical programming of the genes and up-to-date conditioning. They come out of a machine. There is no thinker of the thought. The thinker is contained, or the notion of a thinker is contained within the thought itself. Like, I am considering what course of action is best. So the I is contained in the thought, and it creates the notion that there is a thinker thinking the thoughts. And there is no thinker thinking the thoughts. There are just thoughts happening. In a causal explanation, there are thoughts happening out of a programmed biological instrument. So you can't be the thought. You are that which is aware of the thought. And that which is aware of the thought is not a thought that says, oh, I am that which is aware of the thought. That is more thought. What is aware of that? What is aware of that is primal. It is that innate sense of existence, that part and parcel of that innate sense of existence is the sense of, or the function of awareness. It's happening all the time. We don't need to make it happen. Just like the fire doesn't need to make itself hot. Awareness doesn't need to, or consciousness doesn't need to do awareness. It is happening by default all the time. The thing is, we're convinced that it is the body and the person that is aware. Just like we're convinced that there is a person thinking, we're convinced that there is a person being aware. Whereas the awareness is aware of the body, is aware of the thinking. The awareness is before all of those objects. For as long as we're convinced that it's the other way around, then there is this identification with thoughts, with a body. And then life isn't seen in a healthy perspective. So non-doership and non-attachment, the distinction between the working mind and the thinking mind, can all come in after awakening to the fact that I am not the thinking, and it requires it requires there to be a recognition of all of the thinking that is so prevalent in daily living, in daily life. There is a very unconscious thinking that happens just as soon as objects are seen. There is a thinking about ourself relative to what is being seen. And it's automatic and unconscious. And until awareness is directed to see that thinking as a thought that says something and creates an experience, but is not necessarily what it says it is. So awareness needs to see this as thought. So we'll take some questions and see where we go from there. Hello, Holger.
I think Eric was first, but hi, Roger.
Hello.
Impersonal, but impersonal is totally me. I mean, it's intimacy. It's myself.
Yes, so the word impersonal is used to denote free of personality, free of age, free of gender, free of thinking about this or that. So it's used. So it is as intimate as you can get. It's as directly I as one can be. So from that point of view, it's as personal as it can be. And the word impersonal in this context is referring to the absence of defining oneself as an individual, let's say.
So amazing, because habitually I always felt a gap, distance, just through the word impersonal. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. I mean, it's beautiful. Another thing about thinking, so it sounds funny and it sounds silly, but can I use thought?
Can you use thought?
Yes.
Can you use thought to do what?
Yeah, just to participate in life. Or most of my past was just resistance. Mm-hmm. The idea that I live in a dysfunctional system, that I don't want to participate to cause more confusion and damage, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, so it really comes down to what the objectives are, and the objectives are always, in a way, changing depending on where we are. So there are certain movements in the spiritual seeking process that by default have their different parts of the process, and so they have different objectives. And some of those parts of the process, thinking is not useful. And so, in a way, we give up thinking. There are other parts of the process where thinking is useful. And so you can't sort of say, well, I've given up thinking, because then you can't do certain parts of the process. So it's fine for there to be a giving up thinking for part of the process, and then a taking thinking back up for another part of the process. And if we become familiar enough with the different parts of the process, we might find that in the morning we do the no thinking part of the process. That's what's happening. And then in the afternoon there is a thinking part of the process, or it can be for 10 minutes. There's the no thinking part, and then there is the thinking part. And as long as there's a familiarity with using the right tools for the right job, in a sense, then then it's fine, and there's a flexibility in terms of the movement. Now, in life, thinking is needed. Let's say when the process, the seeking process, is behind us, or simultaneous to the seeking process, just when we're living practical life and we're not actively seeking in that moment, thinking is necessary. It has to come back in. We have to relate to people with thinking. That's when it's important to know the difference between the working mind and the thinking mind, and see that, the thinking mind, all of this resistance, hatred to oneself, to others, just creates uncomfortableness, and then maybe just that part of the thinking can fall apart or can be put to one side. So in the end, I think if your question is, can I live life with thinking? I'd say, well, we have to live life with thinking, but hopefully it is just the functional working mind, which can include, it can also include the sense of self that is self-referential to an individual. So yes, I am a brother, I am a son, and yet when I'm saying that, there is also an awareness of the fact that when I'm using that thought, it's held in a relative sense, and there's a familiarity and an availability to drop out of I am a brother and I am a son, or I'm a mechanic or a gardener or an accountant, which can all be relatively accurate, and then just drop into my existence where I am that I am. And so there's this flexibility where where nothing is lost, where whatever is needed is available.
The point for me, coming from this place of resistance towards life, basically not wanting to be here, looking at, is there a world that is endangered? I mean, if you see at the craziness of our consumerism, just in practical life, I mean, the whole thing would not be needed if people really would understand that what you are sharing, that our happiness is not, our peace is not dependent on circumstances. So in this regard, I'm just, I feel kind of stuck in not being able to participate, because whatever I would do is just another contribution to the mess that already exists.
Yeah, well, I might be able to add something, because at some point, going back maybe 8 or 10 years ago, I decided I wanted to live without money, or with very little money, because I saw that this money business was the cause of a lot of stress and suffering in people's life. And I thought, okay, if people were able to adopt a simple life, can you live without money, or with much less money? And so I started experimenting with recycling things, repurposing things, bartering, all sorts of different ways of community sharing, sustainable living, sustainable building. And it was sort of fun. I experimented with no electricity for a certain number of days in the week, and working around that. And one of the purposes was to be able to say to someone, if you want, you can do this. Because I thought, it's all well and good talking about happiness, but if there is a significant stress factor in someone's life, then someone could say, well, I can't do that because I have these certain requirements. And so I thought, okay, let's find a way of living outside of the system, the current system. What I ended up realizing is that in doing this, I was fighting what is. And so I realized, look, my situation meant I didn't have to live without money. I didn't have to go without electricity. I had the resources to pay my electricity bill. In a way, I was doing it to say, well, what if one day I didn't have the money to pay my electricity bill? I'd like to be able to know that I can live without electricity. And I guess I figured out I could be innovative in how to earn money if if necessity called. And I thought, do I need to keep perpetuating this? I'm going to live outside of the system. And my conclusion was, actually what you're doing was a fun experiment, but you're resisting what is. This is the economic system that exists. The economic system works on money to buy things, exchange of commodities, time being a big commodity that is monetized. And I thought, why stop using electricity when there's an electricity grid that gives me electricity out of the wall in a very convenient way? Why worry about my own water supply when I have mains water that gives me great water out of the tap? And I decided I'm fighting the system, even though I could see that the system is somewhat flawed, and that in the future it will probably be a different system because we're moving towards optimization, and we naturally move towards optimization. The fact is, this is the best system there is at the moment, and I know that because this is the system that exists. It is a system that, given all of the factors at play, is the system that has been deemed to be the best given all of the factors. And the factors include the capitalist system that's being put in place, the values of humanity, the different values of some groups of humanity versus others. This is what exists at the moment. And so hopefully all of this rambling, this story, can maybe highlight to you that even though there is potentially, in theory, a better way, that's in theory. In practice, this is what exists. And for us to rebel against this is to rebel against what is, which means to rebel against life, which means to not be in flow, to not be in harmony. And when we realize this is just an attack on who I am, this rebellion, and it can fall away in an instant. Like, who cares about the sustainability of life? Who cares about if there is a better way to live life? It may seem like a very noble thing to care about, but is it noble if it interferes with peace for yourself in life? Is it noble? We might say, yes, it's noble because it's thinking about the future generations and all of that. But what if everyone does that and it interferes with the now perpetually for everyone? How noble is that if it's interfering with peace now? And the good news is that if we prioritize peace now by accepting what is, we get peace, and then we find that we're completely present and available to make a functional difference when the system allows us to, which might mean rallying and demonstrating if the situation requires it, and at the same time knowing when not to rally and demonstrate if the system is not ready for change, because you can't force change on a system. But if you can see it's just ready to change and it just needs a push, that's when you step up and you're available for that. So acceptance of the system doesn't mean complacency. It doesn't mean that at all. People will hear it and they think that their resistance is making a difference. Whereas in fact it's just disturbing one's own peace of mind. And so when the other is heard, which is acceptance of what is, this is the system, it's interpreted as, oh, that's a cop-out, that's never going to bring improvement, that's never going to bring optimization, that is, that's selfish. But it's not really, that's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to be ready to embrace and move towards improvement and optimization, but know when that is doable.
Great joy to me. It's wonderful. I mean, it totally makes sense what you're saying, and it deeply resonates with my understanding. And we could maybe talk for hours about this. And I just thank you for this. It really helps me a lot. I really love this I am that I am, this deeper understanding you shared today. It does something. It's beautiful. Thank you, Rod.
Thank you, Holger. Hello, Eric. You've got to unmute yourself, Eric.
Okay, I had my phone in my pocket, but can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Good. We needed it. It was nice with some silence, I guess. And speaking of I am that I am, I'm sitting in a cathedral actually, so that's why I'm keeping my voice down a little bit. I hope it's okay. First of all, Roger, I heard your announcement this Monday that that you're gonna bring satsangs down a little bit in numbers, and I just wanted to tell you that this amazing streak of satsangs over the last months has. I consider it absolutely one of the greatest gifts life has given me. So eternally grateful for that.
Thank you, Eric. You're welcome. I'm glad that it's been received that way.
Yes, and I really hope that you will enjoy your evenings off for the time coming. And then this is going to sound dramatic, but I really felt I wanted to talk to you today because I really hate my father. And in other words, there is a lot of hate for my father in this body-mind system. And actually, I say this with a great relief today, because I feel that until earlier today, the doership belief in me has really tried not to hate my father. And today, somehow, I just admitted to myself that I hate my father a lot.
It sounds. It sounds. It sounds healthy from one angle, actually.
It is actually, because it's been going on like this, that we had an argument yesterday, or in my view, he had an argument with me yesterday, and I was silent, which I felt good about, because a year ago I would not have been so silent and said, and we never come anywhere with the arguments. And but what is happening today is that the doer, the thinking mind is producing all the brilliant killer lines that I didn't say yesterday to make me right in this. And identity goes there, and that triggers this hate feelings in me. And then the thoughts are seen. And before today, there was this guilt about that it's very unspiritual of me to I should not hate him, I should love him, and all of that. But today I feel that it's like a cockfight between the thinking mind and the working mind, because the working mind comes up and says he's not the doer and you are not the doer, and this is predetermined and it feels good, but it feels like in the cockfight between the thinking mind and the working mind, the thinking mind has the advantage of these powerful feelings of hatred that bubbles up, that I can see that it's a lifetime of suppressed hate. So the working mind has a tough fight here.
In fact,
and there is not so much rest.
Yeah.
So, I would be very, very thankful for a comment on that, Roger.
Yes, it may actually be in this case that it isn't the working mind's fight to have. That the working mind doesn't have a job to do here. I say that because there are broadly speaking, three quite valid approaches in the seeking path, and the three different approaches all exist. They're not three different teaching paths. These are three approaches within an individual's movement in the seeking process. And often we hear about one or two of them, and then we become sort of exclusively apply that one or two movements that we've heard about. And in non-duality teachings, the one that is hammered home, especially in the top-down teaching, is just witnessing, right? Just so not even bringing in the working mind. That's different. That's a second approach, but the witnessing is just allow the sensations to be there, and they'll dissipate. Just witness it. That is quite akin to abide in I am. There's slight variation. Witnessing has more of a sense of awareness to it. Abide in I am, more of a sense of beingness, but they're really not that different. And that's the movement that is often emphasized. And that's a very important movement. But I'd suggest it's one out of three movements. The other is to understand some concepts, be delivered, get a framework, and be able to have the working mind investigate and the working mind see the hatred and then explain or reinforce the fact that there actually is no doer, and that all of the things we talk about. That would be a second movement. And a third movement that I think we really have to appreciate is a movement of feeling the energy, feeling the hatred, feeling the emotions, without interfering in them with method one or method two. Witnessing doesn't allow us to really feel, because witnessing is sort of like a detachment, where there's no interest in all of the detail of there isn't the capacity to allow feelings, because feelings tend to be more of the body and witnessing tends to be outside of the body. So witnessing interferes with really feeling the body feelings. And investigation also tends to look at the whole situation in quite an objective manner. And the feelings, the emotions, are not at all objective. They're very, from one perspective, we'd say they're very irrational. They're highly personal. Looking at it, this is what he did to me, etc., etc. And so method 1 and 2 don't really support a release of the feelings. And I think that feeling that, even though the narrative from one side says, oh, this is very unenlightened to have all this hatred, and because we think, enlightenment is the absence of hatred, then we say, well, I'm seeking enlightenment, so I shouldn't have all of this, so I don't want to express it. And we need to hear that actually the expressing it, the feeling it, and the expressing it is an essential part in the movement towards the end of suffering. Because, as you say, all of this is locked away from the past, and it's so hidden and suppressed that we don't appreciate, and we don't see the reality. So what you're saying today is something I encourage anyone who feels like, yes, I need to keep it real, to do, which is to call it as it is. I hate my father, if that's the feeling. I hate life, I hate God, I don't want to be here. It's to put words onto the feelings that we're spending so much time suppressing. And in doing that, we're keeping it real, and we can see it instead of convincing ourselves of something that we think we should be, let's say, or we think we shouldn't have. And we're petrified to see that we hate someone because we don't want to admit that of ourselves. But unfortunately, not admitting it is not bringing us towards clarity and towards flow. So I think you're on the right track.
So much, Roger, and I feel like I want to underscore this that you say also, that because I could never imagine that recognizing to myself that I really hate my father could bring a relief. It's so upside down world compared to what I would have thought, and I think that what you say now with these three different approaches, or what we should call them, or
movements.
I think movements. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think that what's been happening in my case now is that they have all been mixed and in this process, because it's been a turmoil of thoughts and emotions. So that has made it very confused. So so that's very nice to get those separated in a way and clarified. And there is just one question about the last of the three movements, the feeling of the feelings. And I know I don't need to ask you who is feeling the feelings, but maybe it's more like how would that happen to feel the feelings? Is that the focusing on the feeling, or is it an opening for the feeling? Or I guess there's sometimes a struggle in not focusing on a particular feeling. I don't know if that is some witnessing conditioning that interferes with with the notion of feeling a feeling.
Yes, it does. Witnessing, if we think that is exclusively the way to go, will get in the way of feeling feelings. And a lot of the time witnessing is the way to go, but sometimes it's not, which is why we need to just know that there are the three different movements, and they're all valid, and we can't choose really which one, and we can't say, oh, today I'm going to do this one. It's not like a crossword puzzle and you can choose which one to do. It's simply about knowing and understanding the different movements and why they're important. And then on the right days, just allowing the water to go down that pathway, which if we, let's say, are stuck with witnessing and investigation of the concepts, and maybe thinking that, enlightenment is the absence of hatred, so I can't possibly invite hatred in, that would be counterproductive, we think. So if that's what we think, then the water never gets to go down the feeling route. Now that feeling route is only going, or that water going down that route is only going to happen when the body and everything cooperates, which really means when the hatred feelings or the sadness feelings, whatever it is, are very close to the surface, and you really feel like, I can't even work. I I don't want to socialize. And if you're really sensitive to what you feel, it would be, I just need to go and be on my own and give myself some space. And in that, when you're on your own, giving yourself space, which really needs to be a result of the feelings being heavy enough, you know. So the day after you've had this argument, it's all pretty raw. So today could be a good day when the feelings are really close to the surface and saying, let me out. And so if you know that it's a valid movement, on those days you could say, yes, I'm just going to surrender to this feeling. And I think you can put words onto the feeling, you know, just like you don't have to think, you just say what the feeling is saying, which is, you know, I hate you, you don't ever listen to me, you always think you're right. And the words come out. And get really angry, get really emotional, which I actually I don't mean get, but allow that to be authentic. And what that's doing is it's allowing of the suppressed, that they're really feelings that we're afraid of. And it's saying, okay, it's just a feeling, it's a misunderstanding of who I am that was locked away a long time ago. And I'm not willing to keep it hidden forever.
Out of the cathedral before I let all this out, Roger. But thank you so much. These feelings, they want their freedom. I can,
yeah,
for sure.
Yes, there are about 3 or 4 or maybe more videos on the YouTube channel talking about. So if you searched energetic release, coming back into the body. There are a series of talks on emotional release, I think, these are all in the titles of the talks. So you might get something from listening to those talks.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Roger. Hi.
Hi
Thanks
there.
very much for your talks so far. It's been really good.
You're welcome.
My question's got to do with feelings of intense sort of like an abyss. Like I feel like there's a point I've reached where there's no expectations, but it feels very intensely like there's nothingness. There's just no thing. There's just experience, nothing outside experience. It feels very lonely and very odd and strange. I just wonder, is that something that's common that will pass as a phase? Never heard you speak about it, or what? Do you have any comments about that? About the feeling of being in an abyss?
Yes, I mean, it's sometimes referred to as the spiritual desert, where you've left one shore, but you haven't got to the other side yet. And leaving one shore means you've sort of left the game where you were posing, putting on a certain mask, investing in outcomes. That sort of has been seen, and it's been seen that you did that for a long enough period of time to realize that it's not meaningful. There's a shallowness to it, and then attention falls on it, and you say, I'm just not willing to live life in this way anymore. And so then, your friendship groups change because you realize that the things you had in common they don't exist in the same way anymore. You don't believe in the same things. You don't value the same things, and you can't talk to that many people about how you're thinking and how you're seeing life and how you're changing, because most people don't value those things. They value the things that you're no longer valuing. And so you can't find yourself invested in that anymore. And at the same time, the system still has work. There's still work that needs to be done on the system. Life tends to put this in place when it needs you to have space and time. So you lose interest in going out and socializing. And a lot of that is probably there, in my experience it was, to give space so that attachment to outcomes can be weakened. And it does feel like, I hope this isn't where I end up living the rest of my life from, because it does feel like it's missing juice, it's missing. So yeah, you've left one shore and you haven't quite got to the other side yet, where there's something new on the other side. And if you've ever watched the Matrix movies, there's a scene in there where, I can't remember his name, but one of the guys decides he's had enough of this, this hard life where there's no more pleasures in life and all of that. And he says, I wish I never came here, essentially. So he's doing a deal with the agents to exchange information about where Morpheus is or whatever, in exchange to be reinserted back into the Matrix. Where he said, I know that the taste of the steak and all of that is all just an imagination in a mind in a jar, essentially, but ignorance is bliss. I'll have my old life back, thanks. And that is one way you could go. The thing is, you can't unsee, you can't go back, really. In the movie, he could get reinserted, the memories of whatever he was doing get erased, and he's back in living the life in the dream. And that decision of his came out of being in that halfway place that just doesn't seem satisfying. And so he chose, put me back in to the Matrix, like into the old life where I'm seeking after pleasure, and that's better than this. So it gets better. As far as I see it, it's just par for the course. It's part of the process. I think you've got.
Sorry, I was muted. Oh, yeah, I was unmuted. Thank you for that. Yeah. So, do you have any suggestions of any recommendations of what you could do during this period to remain stable and not to lose it and not to sort of make a mistake or something?
Well, I mean, I think the best I can offer is the explanation that says, look, it's understandable. This happens. It's a phenomena of essentially coming to know ourselves differently, rebuilding essentially the sense of self. And at some point, so you're definitely not alone. There was a lady on a week ago or so saying the same thing, and at some point you'll become interested in the things you've lost interest in, but in a different way. So I think the best I can offer at this point is not so much techniques, but rather an assurance, somewhat of an assurance that this is understandable and it's not a sign that things are all going downhill.
Okay. Thank you, Roger. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Hello, Melissa.
Roger.
Hi there.
Hiya. I just want to know, because you were talking about like optimization and improvement a bit earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And my kind of background is self-development, personal growth. It's stuff that I've always been interested in. Mm-hmm. So how to know when the mind says, like, oh, you need to, improve this aspect of yourself, say, like around social anxiety, let's take that for an example. Mm-hmm. But then how do you know if it's that mind telling you this stuff, like it's kind of like that it shouldn't be believed, or whether actually, oh, I can use that to now work on this aspect of me that needs kind of improving? Mm-hmm. Like, if that thought comes with suffering, which it would, I guess, in that case. Mm-hmm. But then you also said that that no suffering thoughts are useful. So I'm just a bit confused on that point.
Mm. Well, you don't need suffering to bring about change. You can mm-hmm. Register that, okay, this is not so great, and let me see if I can do something about it. So the actual thought to do something about something can be quite a rational and objective assessment that says, okay, this is the way I am now. It's leading to these situations that are not great. Let's see if I can do something about it. And let's say full stop. Now, so that's not suffering. That's an objective assessment of the situation. And if it is the working mind, it will also say, so I'm going to try to do something that may make a difference. However, I know the outcome is not in my control. What's also important is for that working mind to realize that outcomes that are not optimal are essentially outcomes, and it is not where my happiness is going to be found. So self-improvement isn't where peace of mind is to be found. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't engage in self-improvement, because self-improvement in and of itself, you could say, is beneficial. But let's not mistake the benefit it offers as happiness. So if we're not strong enough and we see that's a problem, like physically strong enough, we might say, okay, I need to start going to the gym to strengthen my back or my whatever. And so you say, let me do that. I'll go to the gym and see what happens. You might go to the gym and pull a muscle and make everything worse. You might go to the gym and get a stronger back and find that your back pain goes away. So no reason to not try to improve the situation, but let's also understand that your happiness is not dependent on improving your strength. Your back pain may be, but your happiness isn't. So what that means is if we want to self-improve in the area of suffering, so if we take strength is a circumstantial thing. So if someone says, yeah, but I'm not talking about strengthening my muscles, I'm talking about anxiety, which is a form of suffering. I say, well, so see if you can do something about the anxiety, like go to some sort of workshop or hypnotherapy or whatever, understand the outcome's not in your control, and understand that suffering is added onto it if you think that that has to change. So hopefully with a bit of tweaking, we can get ourselves into the most healthy position, healthy attitude, it comes down to self-improvement. And that is that enlightenment is not about self-improvement. Enlightenment is about the absence of resistance. So the absence of thinking one needs to improve absolutely. So that's important. Enlightenment is not about self-improvement, it's about acceptance. And at the same time, there's nothing wrong with self-improvement if it can happen, but understand it's not in your control, or the outcome isn't in your control. And so with all of these things tweaked in the right way, there's the best of both worlds. You can, do what you can to improve the situation and find yourself not attached to the outcome.
That makes a lot of sense. But then how do you know? Like, because I know my mind can play real tricks, as all of us can. Like, how can you work it out? Whether it's the mind just saying like, oh, you've got to, you're really terrible at, let's say, maths or something. You're really awful at maths. You need to go to a maths class and get better at your skills. Mm-hmm. But then how to figure out if actually what the thought that comes with suffering is saying is true, or whether it's just like, a thought that shouldn't be believed.
So if it comes down to what is at the root of the thought, if the root of the thought is you really are not a worthwhile human being because you fail at maths and you're not even good at art, and so it's about time that you become a more worthwhile human being. So go to some maths classes. Mm-hmm. That to me is suffering, because it has the error in there saying you're not a worthwhile human being, and so I wouldn't say that that's useful. Now, someone might say, well, but it got me to maths class, and then I ended up being better at maths. And I say, well, but it included a fundamental error about who you are. And you might be better at maths, but you've essentially reinforced the idea by not challenging it. You've reinforced the idea I'm not a worthwhile human being because I'm not excelling in things. And that's, to me, the priority would be to stop engaging in ideas about oneself that are misguided. And as I was saying before, you don't need suffering thoughts to objectively assess a situation. If you find that you're getting in trouble at work because you're not adding things up correctly, then a thought can just arise and say, look, this is becoming a problem, I need to fix it. And we don't need to bring in, I'm not a good enough human being into it, to get us to go to maths classes. Yeah. I think we'll take one more question. James. Hi, James.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Lovely. Well, good to meet you. This is my first time coming to one of yours.
Great,
I've been
welcome.
watching you for a while and reading Ramesh's books, and also Wayne Lickerman's as well.
Nice.
Yeah, even though I can clearly see that everything is unfolding by itself, and I can also clearly see that I'm not doing anything. You mentioned something about waking up in the morning, and that I wake up in the morning with terrible anxiety, and also lots of thoughts about the past and about what people think about me, or what my annoyance to people, my all these kind of things, blaming people and feeling like I've not fulfilled my ambitions and inadequacy. So all these things emerge, and that creates a lot of tension in my chest, in my heart, and so it creates procrastination. And I also find it frustrating that there's a huge disparity between me understanding all this kind of stuff at quite a deep level, and people's projection onto me, like what you said about the teacher and the father and the brother position. People project onto me in a certain way, particularly in England, say with the class system and that kind of thing as well. And so I find it quite frustrating to be able to not transcend that, really. I'm kind of like stuck. It's similar to what you said about the Matrix analogy. I'm stuck in this halfway house between seeing that is the totality unfolding, and it's so vast, there cannot be a doer in relation to that. But then all these things arise that I find frustrating, which I can argue, obviously, still say that is part of the totality as well. So what is my question? I suppose the question is how do you make that shift to peace?
So the core of the teaching is you are not the doer. And so when the question is, so how do I do it? We might get to have a little bit of a laugh and go, maybe the doer is asking the question. And if the doer is the cause of suffering, then the principle behind the question is perpetuating the suffering. So we have to see where the question is coming out of a resistance to our way of being, to our way of functioning in this week or this moment. And it may just be because it's not as good as it could be. Let's say anxiety is there, or fear is there, blame is there. And ingrained attitude is, I want it to be different. Tell me how to make it different. And because we talk about shifts and we talk about the end of suffering, it can sound like, well, you're talking about the end of suffering, so tell me how to do it. And really what I'm saying is the end of suffering can happen, but maybe not for you. I'm just saying it's available in life. Now, I'm not saying it isn't available for you, but I'm not saying it is, because the whole point is that we're not in control of the outcome. And even though we hear that, the sense of self is so deeply ingrained with, I want things to be better. That's its attachment to outcomes. And I need to do it. And it's that identity that is at the root of all of the anxiety, if it's there, all of the blame, if it's there. And so surrendering and realizing I'm not in control, it might not be for me, it might be my destiny to live this way for the rest of my life, can sound like really bad news. But actually, that can be the surrendering of the doer, because in that moment it can be seen, oh, there I am again, insisting on life changing. So I'm asking, how can I change life? How can I become free of suffering? Which I know is the topic of the talks, but the talks are never saying, here's a whole lot of instructions for a doer to go away and do it. The talk is saying, here's a whole lot of descriptions, even if sometimes they sound like prescriptions. At the times when they sound like prescriptions, remember they're never a prescription because there is no doer to make something happen. They're just descriptions of things that might happen. And an example of that is, let's say, it's a description that says blame towards the other for what they did that has delivered pain is a form of suffering. So that's a description. It says blame, which is hatred towards the other for what they did that delivered pain, has an uncomfortableness to it, and it's a form of suffering. So it's just a description. It's not saying you should stop blaming. Now, it's a subtle difference. I'm putting it forward as a description. The doer hears, oh, that will be better if I don't blame. So what he's saying is, I have to stop blaming. So hopefully this little description I've put forward might demonstrate how the doer, that is the root of all of the problems that come before, is perpetuating by saying, tell me how to make life better.
Yeah, that's good. I see clearly that I cannot stop, even though I'm intellectually aware that I should not blame, or I'm aware that it causes suffering, I suppose, better word. It still happens.
Yes.
Or regret, say, regret certain times of my life, and sometimes analyze it inside out and go into it. And that can cause anxiety, or it can cause depression, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I'm consciously aware that that causes suffering,
Mm-hmm.
it still happens.
Yeah.
I still do it. And that's frustrating, because I know full well if I didn't do it, then there'll be peace.
But you're not doing it, you see. It's happening. So if you look at it like, oh, but I still do it, then it will be frustrating, because you'll say, if I could stop doing it. The point is, you're not doing it. There is a body-mind organism that is designed by life, and it's designed in such a way that that anxiety, or what were we talking about? Blame? Yeah, blame. Regret. Such that regret happens. Now, so that means that, trying to think of an instrument. What's an instrument? That, well, just a machine, like a calculator. A calculator has been designed, and when you press the plus button, it adds numbers, because that's how it's designed. So we can't expect it to do differently. And we just don't relate to the body-mind organism like that. And the fact is, it's like that. So life has programmed the body-mind organism such that regret happens. Now, the thought that says, I, the doer, that is doing regret, which is a complete fiction, that there is no doer doing regret. There is a body-mind organism designed to feel regret. But the thought that says, I, the doer that is doing regret, should stop doing regret, is overlooking the mechanics of where the regret comes from. So what you're saying is, you know that regret is suffering, and yet the regret still happens. So the best we can do is go, it seems like it's destined for there to be regret in this moment. And there's destined for there to be regret really if it's understood. If that's understood, then the only thing that's left is to let it be.
That's very simple and straightforward, isn't it? It seems. I think the frustrating is I've had moments in my life where I've been a calculator and turned into something else and been peace, where everything's uplifted and I felt, content and then it's gone again. I think that is the frustration, is that.
Yeah. So let's look, the body-mind organism is never static. So analogies are always going to be limited. So a calculator is more or less static. The body-mind organism is something that is hungry sometimes, and then it's tired at other times. It produces suffering at times, and at other times it produces peace, or the absence of suffering. And in each case, it's because of its design in that moment, and it's always changing. So when there is peace, then we can go, this is what is destined according to the body-mind organism's current design. We're too used to looking at things in a macro sense. In a micro sense, the body is continually changing all the time. And when there is suffering, we go, this is a result of how I am in this moment. That doesn't mean that in 5 minutes you're not going to feel peace, but you have to wait and see.
I suppose it's the identification, isn't it, with that particular emotion that keeps it going and going and going, and it becomes who you are, kind of thing, but you don't want that identification. so there's like an inner conflict and a struggle.
Yes, which is why it's described that the cause of all the problem is attachment to outcomes and the belief in personal doership. So attachment to outcomes says, I want life to be pleasure, 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 which means obviously when there is pain or suffering, we say, well, this is not how it should be. I want it to be different. So that's attachment to outcomes. And it's like that because we're convinced that our completeness is to be found in life being perfect. So essentially we're very psychologically invested in life turning out pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. And the belief in personal doership. I'm making myself feel this way, so I need to change it. And both of those attitudes, which are ingrained in our sense of self, neither of those allow for an acceptance. Both of them are the opposite of acceptance. They're resistance of what is. It's like, I need to change it. I, as the doer, need to change it. And why do I need to change it? Because it's simply not acceptable, because it's not ideal, it's not optimal. So both of the attitude of doership and attachment to outcome force non-acceptance to be what's going on with life.
The doer is so ingrained, isn't it? So the idea of a doer is so ingrained within the body-mind. So even when you say that, even though there's a part of me that does see beyond the doer, but even when you say those things, there's still an interpretation from a doer that I can somehow And so it's difficult to. I can kind of I can clearly, vaguely see that surrender is the way to peace.
That's it. So it's surrender, and the doer can't do surrender. So the doer might think, okay, I need to surrender. But in fact, surrender is an act that happens when the doer has nowhere to go. So in the moment where the doer realizes there's nothing for me to do, every time I try to do something, I'm digging myself deeper into the hole. And it stops. Because in that moment it's seen that is the whole problem. That is the movement that has seemed to be the solution in life, and yet it's the problem. So we're like going around telling everyone to be quiet, making the most noise. So we want a quiet space, and we go around shushing everyone, being the noise in the space. And if everyone tells you to shut up, and you then realize, I have to stop. But all of this is a sort of, it's referred to as grace because it just hits us at a certain moment. It's like, oh, I can't do this. And just the stop of trying. That's when we get surrendered.
Seems impossible, doesn't it?
It is impossible for the doer. If it just, there has to be a moment where the doer collapses. And obviously you can't collapse yourself.
No, why does it collapse then? What's the...
It's a thought that arises in a particular in a thought, an insight in relation to something that's happening, where there is just a clarity that sees that movement that we've been applying our whole life is the problem. And who, it's referred to as grace when it happens. It's like, oh.
Yeah. I've had vague moments of that in my life where it's all uplifted and I've gone, oh yes. But then there's kind of, I look back on that moment and I kind of think, then there's regret that it, like prior to my wedding, I had that moment of grace and then it went again. I was quite anxious on my wedding day. And I look back and I think if that grace had continued, then I would probably be more jovial and happy on my wedding day. Not the fact that I was terrible on my wedding day, but it was quite stressful. And that obviously then links to what people think about you and all that. And sometimes I can really just analyze that and regret the fact that grace didn't continue. So there's kind of like a total, chaotic contradiction in that whole process.
Yeah, well, it can help to see that this regret is just disturbing your present moment, and that can be part of the insight that just says stop it, stop. And yet you've also said that it could be our destiny to know that regret disturbs the present moment, and yet the regret keeps going on. And so if that happens, you go, oh, well, it seems like it's destiny for there to be suffering in this moment. What to do? Let it be. When it comes to regret, the truth of the matter is, if you had a power to do something differently, would you be brave enough to make the change? I can tell you I wouldn't. I'd be too worried. I'm completely on board with the fact that I'm not the doer. If someone said, okay, you can have the power to go back and change something, I go, no, thank you. Don't want that. We think, oh, I regret doing this, I'd do it differently. Like, you do one thing differently and the consequences, you might bring humanity to its knees by having been happy on your wedding day. So when we appreciate that that's the truth, you going back and being happy on your wedding day might have meant that you went out partying and a terrible accident happened and your whole life is different and it could be much worse than it is now. So if you realize that, you go, regret is just a silly thing to think about, because even if I had the power, I wouldn't change a thing. Because who knows where we'd end up.
That's quite a profound thing what you said there. I assume that's the reason for me being here, to to hear that. It's that is a very profound idea, and also like my daughter wouldn't. I was watching a documentary. Funny, I never thought of this. But I watched a documentary about talking about sliding doors and that kind of thing. It was saying even the most tiny thing would not have led. So even if I'd have done anything before Ada Rose coming into this world, she would not be here. So even opening the door at a certain different time wouldn't, because obviously that moment of conception wouldn't have taken place. So, so from that perspective, that's very helpful. I don't know why I've not linked those things together. However, I get a sense that regret is quite a habitual thing for me. So even though I see that it might continue after this. Yeah, and then there's another thing, wanting things in the future, isn't it? So wanting the regret to end is another cluster mess, isn't it, of wanting to control something.
Yes, that's expectation, because you're expecting that if that happens, everything's going to be great. And that expectation then means frustration when life doesn't turn out that way. So, yeah.
Acceptance is a tricky thing, isn't it?
It's the simplest of things because it's not something you do. Acceptance is the absence of non-acceptance. So the falling away of non-acceptance is a tricky thing, let's say.
Added on to that. That's really helpful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.